All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. I am extremely humbled, honored, and gracious that Mr. Winter is here to join us once again, of course, for another fantastic lecture that, if I'm not mistaken, he prepared specifically to present to us. And I'm so appreciative of that. Without further ado, Mr. Winter, how are you doing today? And the floor is yours, sir.
Great. Thank you, Dave and Generation Z. It's always great to be with Generation Z because they make us feel younger. That's good. So yes, the context by which this evening's conversation arose. This evening's conversation, the theme is measuring and defining life force, key to nutrition, architecture, and in fact, lucid dreaming. And a context for how this conversation arose. First, my partner Valerie is here, and her group, Ananda Marga, is working on their concept of life force called microvita, which is in a philosophical and spiritual and traditional approach. And we have a conversation with that group on Thursday. And as I was meditating on, well, we electrical engineers would like to think that we know what life force is, do we? Question mark. Well, tonight we would like to present evidence we've measured. And the reason that's relevant in context from this bigger picture is the film that's being released actually tomorrow. Let's see, I'm going to pin here. The film that's being released tomorrow is a series or a film I did with Elena Danaan, the famous ET contact from the Galactic Federation, entitled The Physics of Stargates and Portals. And I think it's going to be very exciting. I recommend check out Elena Danaan's channel for our new film on the physics and science of stargates and portals. But the story to that Maury is, which is film released tomorrow, is that we introduce this as related to the teachable and measurable physics of what induces a lucid dream, actually. And as you all know, we've talked about that for some time, that the Therify is one example of a plasma implosion or conjugate compression system that, in addition to rejuvenation and time reversal, apparently there's multiple serious reports of triggering lucid dreaming. And we believe we know why, because you implode the aura in plasma, and that compression allows the aura then to propagate coherently in what's called longitudinal EMF, sometimes incorrectly called scalar or torsional, and sometimes called the Ba from the car, the rainbow light body, or the Kesjan body. So that coherent longitudinal propagation of the electromagnetics of the body's aura in a compressional array inhabiting is the beginning of understanding what is compressed through the wormholes of the portals and stargates. So it kind of boiled down to, if we understood the life force physics of what makes your aura dense enough to propagate coherently into the lucid dream, and any Aboriginal would know, then you have the key concept to how inhabiting the array works in the implosion physics of what is a stargate and portal. So then, meditating on that, we come to realize that if we could in fact define what life force is in a seed or the tomato you're about to eat, or what life force in a building is, if you could define and measure what is life force, the same exact physics of compression that makes the charge dense and therefore able to propagate efficiently in the compressional longitudinal EMF component, then you're ready for the Stargate. In fact, you're ready for the lucid dream, you're ready to take memory through death. So all of those conversations about getting coherent enough in your aura begin with the simple and measurable electrical science of measuring and defining life force itself. So that's a little background here. I also want to note and acknowledge, I see Veda Austin has joined us. You could even wave there, Veda. Thank you for coming. Veda, you're in New Zealand and then California, I think. Is that right, Veda?
That's right. Yeah, you can tell by my accent I'm from New Zealand, but I'm out in California at the moment.
And Veda is doing some amazingly beautiful work, following indirectly on Emoto, if I understand, where you basically take your secret important magic water and you freeze it, maybe slowly, depending on your technique. And the geometry that emerges in the pattern of the freezing illustrates the life force in that water, the magic of which elemental is there, And Veda has published amazing pictures. They're gorgeous. Is it VedaAustin.com? Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Right. Yes. So and I have a few images in this show about, we called it originally in anthroposophic biodynamics, we called it sensitive crystallization processes in the blood, where you look at the crystallization geometry. There's various ways to slowly crystallize, one of which is to freeze. And as something that has a lot of charge in a liquid will freeze or crystallize, just like the thin film on the windshield of your car sometimes freezes and you see these amazing patterns that turn out to be a map of the astrology of the day. The geometry, the pattern of that freezing indicates the life force in the water, what the face of that plasma field was at the moment it was frozen in that water. And Austin's pictures.
Please forgive me, Dan. I just wanted to ask, or even to Miss Austin, does your work, Miss Austin, have any correlation to the recently deceased Dr. Luc Montagnier's DNA water teleportation experiment?
I think that I've been studying water for 8 years, and I have 32,000 photographs of water responding to human consciousness in not only imagery, but in actually a kind of symbolic language that I've identified 35 what I call hydroglyphs, which are quite phenomenal. So I use all different kinds of waters actually, and I see different signature patterns in different waters. The work is really, really extensive, but it was interesting just listening to Dan talk about dreams, because I've left petri dishes of water on my bedside with the intention that they actually pick up some part of my dream, which takes away my very conscious expression. And what I'm seeing is that the images that appear when I freeze them using my short-term crystallographic technique are completely in alignment with the main part of my dream, suggesting that water itself is actually an observer and plays a much bigger part and role within this human biosystem that we've ever imagined, and that the water outside of the body could well be an observer and able to travel with us through the subconscious realm. It's a very, very interesting area of research, and there's loads to talk about, but I don't want to.
I don't mean to take over Mr. Winter's
that's
lectures.
Okay. And we think that Veda is on the right track here, and it's incredibly beautiful as well. And what we'd like to converse a bit about tonight is, do we electrical engineers understand the physics behind what she's observing in that sensitive crystallization process? And by the way, Dave's question, Veda, was about Luc Montagnier, who was measuring I think we have somebody didn't mute their mic there, who was measuring even homeopathically how even less than 1 molecule per mole would still show up in a measurement of water. So again, it's a matter of a very weak imposed charge field. And so there is a parallel. Now, what Emoto was doing, which was a direct precedent to what Veda does, was seeing that shadow of charge in the freezing process. Emoto interested people around the world. It was beautiful. But sadly, actually, and we knew him well, there was almost no physics, actually, sadly. So there was no one there to say, well, what's the physics and how do we implement this commercially as electrical engineers? Nobody talked about the electrical engineering of what's behind this. An example of that was when Emoto set up his second lab, he did it in basically, I think it was downtown Tokyo, and the electrosmog was so horrible that the pictures did not appear mostly because he didn't realize that the electrosmog environment is going to mess with the picture because you are mapping a weak charge field. It is physics. It's not just magic. So again, a reason to learn a little bit about the physics. So that's why we've included that in tonight's conversation, because the way in which we measure life force in buildings using GDV is highly parallel, and that emerges in the slideshow. And so speaking of that, let me see if I could get that. So it's a keynote called Measuring Life Force. Let's see if this works. So hopefully you're seeing my screen now. Yes, life force measured and defined, key to nutrition, architecture, and lucid dreaming. That's the theme here. Because if we understood life force well enough, we could understand how that weak charge field got into that water that Veda then makes the incredibly magic picture. But how did that charge get there? That's the question on the table. And is that measurable? Can electrical engineers teach this in my University of Detroit electrical engineering curriculum? That's where I want this to show up. Anyway, so life force is effectively, we're saying, implosive charge collapse. That's what it is. And we're going to talk about the Anu, the ultimate particle. Is there an ultimate particle of life force, which is, by the way, what the microvita Ananda Marga people claim, that it's the ultimate particle of life force. We're going to see that it's in fact quantized by Planck, which most physicists would not call a particle, but it has a specific energy, and energy translates to mass indirectly. So anyway, all of this 20-year history we have of measuring life force, and the article for with tonight's conversation, where this film and slideshow and visuals will appear, is goldenmean.info/measuring life force. And I just want to put this is actually not the first slide, one of the more advanced slides here, but just a way to sort of tickle our thinking about this. So hey, Dan, if you're saying that implosive charge collapse in a plasma vortex is the cause and definition and quantizer of life force, that is what I'm saying. It's an implosive plasma vortex. Then you're saying the same thing about gravity. Oh, you're saying that's the cause of gravity, the implosive plasma vortex cone down the center of hydrogen. I'm saying that's the reason gravity exists. And you're saying, oh, that implosive plasma vortex is the reason color exists. Fractalfield.com/photosynthesis. And oh, by the way, you're saying that's the reason perception exists. Hello. You ask these kids who are seeing without their eyes repeatedly when they go into bliss, they close their eyes and they see a plasma vortex tube wormhole tunnel, little vortex appear inside their head. They look down the tunnel and they see an eyeball appear, and that's how they see without their eyes. Therefore, an imploding plasma vortex is the cause of vision. So suddenly, oh, an imploding plasma vortex is the cause of everything. Oops. Well, from the point of view of physics, the universe is made of a single contiguous compressible media, call it charge or ether, which behaves as a superfluid. And that always forms into torus, donuts, which has two vortex. So in physics, it's very conventional to say that everything is made of donuts, which is two vortex. So in physics, called string theory, for example, everything is a vortex. So is this a revelation or not? Well, the difference here, this is the point. All these things, measuring life force, the cause of gravity, the cause of color, and the cause of perception, they're all a plasma vortex which implodes. Remember, the new information here is physics doesn't understand why anything is centripetal. Physics has no clue why anything is centripetal, from electronegativity to the focused human attention, which causes implosion, to gravity. The physics does not know the reason for any centripetal force. There's a little problem here on the physics of planet Earth. That's why they're in the Stone Ages. And that's why they don't know why an object falls to the ground. Details. So once we do understand why a plasma vortex gets centripetal, hint, golden ratio phase conjugation, that pine cone, adding and multiplying phase velocities, making it implosive. That's the reason plasma vortex implode, and therefore that's the reason life force, color, perception, and gravity exist. So what is the difference between life force as an imploding vortex versus gravity, for example? The difference is in the power spectrum. What part of the spectra, all golden ratio multiples of Planck, in every case, whether it's gravity or the origin of color or the cause of life force, it's always golden ratio multiple of Planck, but which part of the spectrum is imploding determines whether that's life force in a seed, or whether it's gravity in hydrogen, or whether it's a cause of vision in the brain. It's all an imploding plasma vortex, but what part of the spectrum? For example, 0 to 40 hertz is the frequency signature of the Schumann harmonics, life force in trees, seeds, and nature, and the reason Gaia is negotropic, and the exact frequencies of the brainwave harmonics that cause bliss and peak perception, and the frequency harmonics of the EKG at the moment of love. They're all 0 to 40 hertz. And we have many examples, and that will be in the slideshow. There's the frequency harmonics in green of the Schumann, and in very close in blue, golden ratio times Planck. And the Schumann harmonics here in blue equal the brainwave harmonics of bliss. So that's all 0 to 40 hertz. And by the way, when you look at the harmonics of the heart at the moment of love, it's the same spectrum, and we'll get there. So now we have a little context to talk about, okay, if that plasma implosion is the capacitance that determines whether a seed is alive or dead, the definition and measurement of life force, then we could commercialize that. Oh, by the way, we did. Therify.net. We caused seeds to grow replicably every day, Therify with plasma. And so we've commercialized it in architecture, in brainwaves, in plasma, and in water. Flameandmind.com, Therify.net, theimploder.com. And in architecture, bioarchitects.net. And we invited some of our wonderful bioarchitects.net today. I don't know if they'll come, but we're going to show examples of measuring life force in architecture. So here, this is the background conversation. Universe is a single compressible medium. We just say that. To say that life force is implosive charge collapse is correct, but also it's cause of consciousness, color, gravity, everything that has mass. So it's all string theory, but it's a twister. So what is that twister? It's a twister, Dorothy. Well, when the clairvoyants looked at the heart of the sun and the heart of the hydrogen and the heart of human, the clairvoyants saw the same thing every time. They called it the Anu. And it's got 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. And later we realized that's a map of the tetracube, 7 spins, inside the dodecacosa, 5 spins, which is called perfected charge collapse. And I'm looking for my vector flexor at this moment. So the vector flexor that Tu van Guven just added to geometricmodels.com, Bucky Fuller's implosive charge collapse, cube octa, ecosa, tetracube, or octa and tetra. So that's implosive charge collapse, and that's used to teach the physics of superconductivity, implosive charge collapse, and the cause of gravity. So that's 5 spins inside 7 spins. It's a perfect slip knot, and that's why when the clairvoyants saw that 7 spins, 5 spins, they drew that picture, and they saw that accurately, and later proved in subatomic physics, cyclosubatomic quarks, the Anu, 3 Anu per quark. So that's why, for example, that's the symmetry of the human heart muscle. 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside, which is classic biodynamic anthroposophy, fields of form, Lawrence Edwards, and vortex of life. And so that 5 spin, 7 spins became the Ophanum sigil of truth. And by the way, that is actually how the movie Stargate got made with those Ophanum letters, but that's another story. So we're talking about the vortex down the perfect slip knot. And you've all seen this slide too many times, hopefully. and this is how the vortex works. So you line this up, and I prove this is specifically the geometry of hydrogen and the side view of that golden spiral down the vortex. The radii of hydrogen, the reason gravity exists. That's a caduceus. And what's happening is that transverse wave entering on the right, EMF, as it travels down the vortex, is squeezed right down accurately to Planck threshold and emerges through a squirt gun, just like a toothpaste tube, in a compression wave called longitudinal EMF, otherwise scalar or torsional, sometimes called the vril. And that longitudinal EMF wave, by Bearden's equation, is proven to be what a gravity wave is made of. Hint, gravity. and more specifically, that's the reason gravity exists. Einstein knew that for gravity to exist, you had to have infinite non-destructive compression. Of course, nobody told him what a fractal was, but also he didn't know how the charge gets out at the center of implosion. This is how. The charge emerges out through the center of the pine cone at Planck into the longitudinal compressional wave, and that inhabits an array. So if the compression is broad spectral and efficient, you can propagate very deeply into that longitudinal array. And that's the introduction to lucid dreaming, stargates, and taking memory through death, is propagating into that array. And we have many pictures here about that. So if we understood how the compression got efficient, which is understanding the physics of what life force is defined by and how it's measured, we could get that compression in our aura, in our nutrition, in our agriculture, in our architecture, and make our auras compress efficiently and then propagate the array, and then we're ready to lucid dream, enter stargates, and die successfully. So that's why we need to study the physics of measuring life force, because then we can design our architecture and our agriculture and our nutrition to produce that kind of compression in the aura. Hint, when Kundalini starts to feel like lightning, that's compression. So that ether wave, compression, rarefaction, and plus and minus charge propagation after compression agrees on the Planck length and time, the musical key of the universe, because any other wave symmetry is immediately destructive. That's why for 1,000 or million light years in all directions, Planck is the same. Now, physics argues that proves the Big Bang. It don't. All it proves is the waves had to produce agreement or they were dead. Hint, Putin. If you can't produce agreement, you're toast. And that's true for waves and people. And that agreement is named Planck. Imagining this to be caused by one Big Bang is childish, because it was written, there's a book called The Continuous Theory of Continuous Creation. That Big Bang didn't have to be one event. It's simply a propagation efficiency that requires agreement on Planck. So here's the three views of that spiral. You've all seen these pictures, and that becomes a holy grail when animated. And these are some of the equations. So you've seen these pictures. And you see the prediction of the radii of hydrogen there. This is kind of the smoking gun. What if hydrogen equals these radii, and then, in fact, the exact frequency of adenosine diphosphate, the exact two frequencies of photosynthesis, the definition of all sacred dimension, the British foot, they all fit golden ratio times Planck. The Schumann harmonics, the brainwave harmonics, the LF wave, the Mayer wave, Earth year, Venus year, precessional year, galactic year. So these are the wavelengths that produce negentropy, golden ratio times Planck, and that is the way out of chaos. So this is all old, you've seen this. These are the physics papers we published on these subjects. First, we showed that this was true of hydrogen, and then we published the paper explaining how this phase conjugation to Planck is the cause of gravity. And these are the published physics papers in the literature. Gravity exists because that phase velocities add and multiply recursively constructively only in golden ratio, and that produces acceleration towards center by adding multiplying phase velocities constructively only in golden ratio. And that acceleration of charge towards center, the cause of all centripetal force, is named the gravity. So this is Tom Bearden's papers. All this is at fractalfield.com/vacuum energy. This is review. That not only is the equation for longitudinal waves the proven physics of what a gravity wave is, but that is the reason biology exists. Hint, implosive capacity, implosive charge compression, which generates longitudinal coherence, which is DNA radio, is the reason biology exists. If we couldn't implode, biology would not exist. So if we could then measure that, we could teach how to make life. Hint, we could make buildings and plants that cause life force. And this is our famous paper on, what Einstein got wrong. This is old news that, Einstein believed that action at a distance was spooky, but now we know action at a distance is caused by longitudinal interferometry. And this is the slide we discussed before. So these are the low frequency harmonics, which identify life force in brain waves and Schumann harmonics, and trees. So here we're measuring a very happy tree on the left. This is an example of measuring life force. flameinmind.com/life force. We put a device to measure 1 microvolt called a brainwave spectrum analyzer, a Muse input, and use our software, flameinmind.com. And this is a tree on the left. And you see the harmonics here. It's just under 8 hertz, about 7.8 hertz, and about 21 hertz. And you see the harmonics we measured in that very happy tree. It was really a magic place in Prado on the magnetic line. And those harmonics were the Schumann harmonics exactly in the tree. And that was a very happy tree. That was a tree with lots of life force. The reason is because those harmonics, golden ratio toward Planck, enable that tree to implode and be alive. That's measuring life force. So now this is, again, from the Measuring Life Force article. This is a bamboo architecture building on the top left. And those are the prominent harmonics. And this is the, remember on the right is the Visico-Bosnian pyramid with SAM. And note the recurrence of this 53 hertz peak here. Remember, people are traveling all over the world to go into that pyramid because they get younger. It works. This is a documented phenomena. Sam, our friend, Osmanagic in the Bosnian pyramids, after they saw thousands of people every week arrive there, and many of them get rejuvenated. It's not their imagination. You want to know why? He measured the low frequency harmonics of that pyramid named infrasound. The reason pyramids vibrate, they're actually in the ancient arterial lymph, what they're called the Hummer, is because they implode the Schumann cascade to a longitudinal propagation. And that's the reason pyramids were a global wireless power distribution grid that worked. Of course, they all had to be on the dodecaecosine nodes, but that's actually how they used the mercury inside to capture the piezoelectric compression wave and propagate the longitudinal further. Actually, that's why the mercury was in the pyramids. That's another story. But so the point is the 53 hertz here, we had measured the same 53 hertz basically around the world. We're measuring here in my own living room, we measure the 53 hertz. And yet when you do golden ratio times Planck, you know where it arrives? 50 hertz. The most common frequency used to heal cancer in the world is 50 hertz. It's proven, actually. So why are we always measuring 53 and not 50? Well, actually, if you take this cascade of bottom right of the known Schumann harmonics, the next harmonic up this cascade is actually 53. Golden ratio times 39 hertz, 53 hertz. So why? It's actually interesting. You see, the theoretical Schumann harmonic that would be golden ratio to Planck is 7.29 hertz here in blue. I don't know if you can see it. Whereas the known measured Schumann harmonic, which is the multiplication of the speed of light divided into the circumference of the planet Earth ringing like a living bell, is 7.83 hertz. So if the Schumann harmonic cascade were perfectly phase conjugate implosive, making Gaia more negentropic, then there'd be 50 hertz. But so if you take 7.29 hertz and multiply by golden ratio, you land on 50. Whereas if you multiply 7.83 times golden ratio exponents, you get 53 hertz. That's why we got 53 hertz right here, because the Schumann harmonics are a little bit off from golden ratio times Planck. And the amount by which they're off, 7.29 hertz versus 7.83 hertz, emerges at 50 versus 53 hertz in the actual Earth grid. That's why we get 53 hertz in all these sacred places. And it relates to the 110 hertz they measured under Malta and all these places. So anyway, the point is, now we know that the life force and the rejuvenation and the negentropy in these structures exists because the harmonic cascade, phase conjugation times Planck, is charge implosive by tuning. So this is all at goldenmean.info/measuring life force and flameinmind.com/life force, and also goldenmean.info/trees, where we did this on trees for many years. So on top here, we took this device on the right. This is a gold egg. It's a gold egg. We laid a golden egg, it's true. We coated real gold into a real high dielectric ceramic egg modeled accurately on an ostrich egg. And the thin film gold coating made it in implosive capacity. And what you put inside there organizes its weak capacitive field, which we measure exactly like a brainwave. And if that egg is fresh, the capacitive harmonic cascade will prove it. And if that egg is stale, then the capacitive harmonics are not organized. It does not implode. That is life or death, literally. So for example, here is in the second to the bottom here, this is the measurement of the capacitive field of a rose oil. In red is a synthetic rose oil. This is the capacitive harmonic cascade of synthetic rose oil. And this, in blue, are the actual frequencies measured from a real, highly potent, fresh rose essential oil. And you see the harmonics here in the fresh rose oil. What happened is the fresh rose oil was able to organize its weak capacitive field. Remember, this is how we do it. We stick it inside the egg, and the voltage difference between the top to the bottom of that egg measured in microvolts, 1/1,000,000th of a volt, and then we spectrum analyze that 1/1,000,000th of a volt, and we say, hello, did you organize your weak electric field to implode? Then we're going to know if you're alive or dead. That's what life force is. It's measurable, and it's absolutely quantized by Planck, harmonic center. So isn't that dramatic? And here is, we measured Fiji water and tank water here. Notice the Fiji water, the capacitance in dark blue. It's really beautiful. There's better pictures of that. Yeah, this is a better picture of the rose oil. This is the rose oil, real rose oil in blue. It's actually an Oriacento healing oil and versus a simple perfume synthetic in pink. And this is the kind of cascade that on the bottom, here's how we measure compassion in the EKG, but it's the same power spectral implosion. Notice it's in roughly the same spectra. On the top, we're measuring 0 to 22 hertz. That's the bandwidth. Those are the peaks there, 17, 12, 7.8. And on the bottom, we're measuring between about 10 and 30 hertz in the EKG harmonics to measure love. RealHeartCoherence.com. This is a fresh potato versus a store-bought potato about 12 weeks old. And this is the difference in the capacitance of ability to organize its weak electric field. So we're saying that this ability to propagate charge through the media actually eventually shows up in the water, which is what Veda is measuring. We're suggesting that charge field, weak order, then propagates at the moment of crystallization and shows up in the picture in the freshly frozen water surface. So this is 4 waters compared: seawater, Grander water, and Franklin spring water. And you see that the seawater had very high capacitance, actually. And here we're actually analyzing the ratio between the contained harmonics in the water to look for the harmonic cascade. Again, you can see the Aqua Fiji had the most capacitance. This is water that has life force. So we're suggesting, Veda, that if we measured the water, this is not an easy measure to take, actually, but if we measured the water before you froze it, we could predict in advance which water would make the prettiest picture, because it was storing the most coherent charge implosion, which would then propagate in the molecular symmetry. This is a fresh picked onion versus an old onion. This is Oriacento healing oil versus synthetic oil. And this is a better picture of the gold egg. We laid a golden egg. We used to measure this. Now we use flameinmind.com and the Muse brainwave headset, which is a carbon fiber transducer. So this is the Perth group did a lot of measures here. And here is measuring seed germination in a capacitor. So that, and this was recently done by some beautiful animation just published on the web. They germinated seeds like this. One was inside what was right next to a Wi-Fi generator, And they turned the Wi-Fi on versus off, and they did a time lapse. And it's scary, man. The seeds, when the Wi-Fi generator was on, didn't move a muscle. The seeds where the Wi-Fi generator was off, you see them growing live real time. It's like, oh, obviously Wi-Fi killed those germinating seeds. It's very real. So this is how we teach biologic architecture. On the bottom, we call, this is the average hospital. It is electrosmog hell. I never felt more nauseous in my life. And this is the average hospital, okay? It's the electrosmog center of the world. It's absolute nausea, whereas this is sacred architecture. So if you want to make life force, then teach architecture. And this is the whole philosophy behind bioarchitects.net, bioarchitects.net. And so this is some more of our work. This is almost 30 years ago. That's why I look so young right there. I'm sitting by the tree we measured. And this is the life force in that tree over time. Note the 8 hertz harmonic here. This is a waterfall landscape plot of the power spectra of the weak capacitive field of that tree. And I learned to do this directly from the famous Professor Phil Callahan, who at that time we were using a hemp fiber dipped in living human sweat or living seawater for high dielectric capacitive coupling, which is what a transducer mirrors. Anyway, and here we're analyzing those harmonics between heart harmonics and earth harmonics and showing that the heart harmonics implode just like the earth harmonics do. So summarizing the life force measures we do, we published at our architecture curriculum for biologic architecture around the world, goldenmean.info/architecture, which now is part of the global network, bioarchitects.net. We show 3 ways to measure life force. And on the left here, we have our partner Korotkov. And what he measures is the ability of the titanium rod to propagate capacitance, which is analogous to the GDV, gas discharge visualization, which is a Curlian technique where you're simply measuring the geometry of capacitive discharge. Note, Veda, there'd be a perfect analog to what's happening in the radiant capacitance in living water freezing. If it's radiating in an orderly way, but in what Korotkov is doing is he's actually measuring the radiance of the capacitance. And so this titanium rod, if you put it in a dead metal building, its Curlian photograph looks like this on the left. If you put the same rod and the same measuring tool under a sacred tree on the right, you get a picture like this, which is the charge is happy to propagate. Whereas on the left, the charge is stuck. It cannot propagate. So permission for charge to propagate defines not just life force, but sacred space in general. So later when Korotkov went to where the Kogis make phone calls to ancestors and measured the fractality of the air, which is what he named this, he proved that Kogis and the tribes can make phone calls to ancestors only if they're in the place where charge distribution is invited, called Hey Ave, heaven, or Plains of Sharon, or Champs-Élysées. So charge distribution efficiency. So Korotkov and I had a long discussion about this. He measures the fractality and the radiance of that charge distribution. And we agreed absolutely this is identical to the physics of what we're measuring with the gold cups. We understand. It's the same concept. We measure harmonic inclusiveness. He calls it fractality in the aura. And the concept is the same. It equals the measurement of charge distribution efficiency, thus defining sacred space. And later we will show how that then is where you can lucid dream, which is where this conversation may go. So I was talking, we were mentioning with Veda and her measurements of life force in water by freezing, the sensitive crystallization processes in the blood, well known in biodynamics. You can crystallize blood slowly and see the geometry of crystallization. Not unlike watching your water freeze slowly on the windshield of your car, and you realize on the day that Jupiter squares Saturn, that freezing pattern is radically different. That is the physics of astrology in a nutshell. It's the geometry of capacitive radiance, and that is frozen in the water literally. Because remember, the molecular array of the water is the atomic array of hydrogen, which is conjugate and implosive. So water can convey that weak electric field, and crystallizing that is a way, it's pattern recognition, but it's actually a way of looking at the plasma of that life force. So this is our gold cup technique. This is actually top center here. This is Nassim Haramein showing he produced an implosive magnetic field which caused a flower to not decay for many months, which I respect that work. And later now we see we're doing that regularly with Therify.net plasma. So implosive plasma, implosive magnetics, not only do they make a seed grow, but they prevent decay, and that's measurable. So in the book, Seeds of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, which is part of how we started this work by John Burke and Hallberg, they showed that the main reason places like Stonehenge were actually built, one of the primary reasons in pyramids too, was to zap the seeds. And people are now buying $20,000, $25,000 Therify systems regularly to zap the seeds because it works. The reason is it causes them to implode and causes growth. So, you know, all these archaeologists went, well, we never found any bodies in those pyramids or stone circles. You know, what were they doing there? Oh, they were zapping their seeds. And by the way, they were zapping their aura so they could lucid dream and die well. It was an implosive capacity. And that causes not just growth, but it causes elimination of decay, which is negentropy. So this becomes biologic architecture, fractality in sacred African architecture. You know, the Africans And Ron Eglash did a beautiful show on this. This is the map of the village, and this is the shaman's house, and this is the altar in the center of the shaman's house, and the inside is self-similar to the outside, and it's all biologic material, high dielectric. So this is an perfect fractal implosive capacitor, and in the center, you could lucid dream, because your aura could be implosively compressed. That is life force. So this is just another image of the sacred tree, the metal. This is just a larger scale image. We can discuss this. So here is that same happy tree, and we're analyzing, which this shows more detail of how our life force measure software. And unfortunately, Patrick, who wrote this software at my suggestion, could not be with us tonight, but the instructions are all at flameinmind.com/lifeforce if you want to do this work. And the option is there to not just measure the harmonics, but to analyze the harmonics that you just measured and check for implosive harmonic cascade, namely life force. In this case, we're analyzing the harmonics in a very happy tree. So, and then obviously our Flame in Mind software can produce the Flame in Sound, which uses the same physics to make the audio harmonics, which is the world's most powerful bliss-inducing audio binaural beat software. Same physics principle, charge implosion. And there's also software there to drive. You can trigger specific chakras at will. You want to feel it in your heart. You want to feel it in your brain. You want to feel it in your tailbone. You can select. It's fun. And that's Patrick's genius, because the frequencies of the chakras are published, and if you can implement that in the heterodyne. So this is Juan Schlosser now, who we feature at goldenmean.info/architecture, his project bioarc.co in Bali. He's one of our leading biologic architects on the planet, and did many of our measures where he built bamboo buildings, gorgeous, and then measured the capacitance and proved, he measured the seed germination and the capacitance and proved the principle. This is the top view of one of his amazing bamboo domes, and check out his website, it's wonderful. And this is, he's comparing on the right, the measurement of capacitance with the Sputnik in the GDV system from Karatov, and he's comparing that to our measurement techniques. And he showed the perfect analog. And you can see, and so he actually showed here the difference in seed germination. So we correlated three things. Seed germination, one way to measure life force. We correlated that to the GDV measurement of life force, which is capacitive discharge, to the Flame in Mind, third way to measure life force, which is spectrum analyzing the weak capacitance for harmonic cascades. And we correlated the seed germination success to the charge implosion measured two ways. So now we can replicably prove in advance by measurement which building is going to cause a seed or a child to grow, because it is charge distribution efficiency. That's what enables sacred space. So if you don't want your kid's aura to be squashed, you know, Einstein got that right. I'm sorry, not Einstein. Steiner got that right. The kids should never touch synthetic or metal. The kids should only touch that to which their aura can embed. Living wood, living fabric, living stone, high dielectric material, which allows your aura to embed in it, and you can inhabit the array. So the building and everything the child touches needs to be high dielectric, no metal, no plastic, no electrosmog. And then the child's aura can grow, and so can the seed. So our curriculum in biologic architecture, which is now around the world, bioarchitects.net, says we can tell in advance which building will cause a seed to grow, and therefore what architect deserves a paycheck. That's our little motto of the story. And so here's more examples from Therify.net. There's a big new center on the Therify.net website of many people who are using the Therify just for agriculture now. And these are some of the early pictures in South Africa. And this is the later picture from Kristen. She says, more than week-old cut roses growing new leaves. I've never seen this before. Only new variable is Therify. And this is Victor Vallone showing there's even publications of cold atmospheric plasma enhances seed germination. This is conventional literature. The best form of cold atmospheric plasma, we believe, is Therify.net. So these are the harmonics from the equation in pink on top, and these are the harmonics Antoine Priory used, which was the antecedent device behind Therify. And this is a picture of what's happening. Those harmonics enable this implosion specifically to the Planck threshold in red, which is the implosion point where it propagates longitudinally and inhabits the array, and that is DNA radial. That's life force. So now we've defined life force, we've measured life force, and we've quantized life force. This is my equation in the center here in cycles per second, cycles per minute. And you see the Schumann harmonics, the brainwave harmonics, and the sacrocranial harmonics. They all fit that equation. And this is from Patrick Boitte's analysis of my work. And this is all at fractalfield.com/conjugate perception. So now we know what life force inside a seed is. These are the links. We know what consciousness is. We know what enables steering a tornado. We know what causes gravity. We know what is the cause of all centripetal, negentropic, and implosive forces. And we can use that commercially, and we've done it. This is the review of the physics. This is from fractalfield.com/fractal photosynthesis. And here on the right, you see the only two frequencies of light that make photosynthesis are exactly golden ratio towards Planck. And those are very narrow. The amount of photosynthesis you get is this curve in black. So if you make green, you kill photosynthesis. It's called negative green. That's why every single plant's green, because that's the only photon that plant spits out, because it's opposite to conjugate. The colors that make photosynthesis by measurement, the amount of photosynthesis you get, are this purple and this orange, which are exactly, precisely at peak, exactly golden ratio multiples exponents of Planck, 427 and 691 nanometers. Proof the cause of photosynthesis and its neg entropy is exactly fractal phase conjugation to Planck. That's the reason photosynthesis exists and the reason it works. Now on the left is a more advanced slide explaining that the visible spectrum, 350 to 700 nanometers, if you convert that into the photon as a torus, its angular tilt exists in only if the platonic angles, 45, 90, 135, and those colors are the angle of tilt of that photon. And the only colors that don't correspond to tetracubic angles, 45, 90, 135, are the 63 and 117 degree angles of the tilt of that photon, calibrated exactly, which are what blue and yellow is in nanometers. 63 and 117 degrees are the internal external angle of a dodecahedron. So the photons tilt in the dodecahedron, and that's the reason rainbows exist. In other words, phase conjugation is the reason color exists. That's the reason it's sorted. That's why rainbows happen when Tibetan saints die, because they cause the atmosphere to be centripetal. So we looked at this, the Anu literature, and that's the phase conjugate collapse, which is the platonic array called the atomic table. The nucleus is platonic. The electron shells are platonic tetracupododecacosa. So that's implosive charge collapse is the reason. The alchemic way to study chemistry for your kids so they can visualize the reason chemistry exists, they need to see it as the clairvoyant did right here. They seem to see the SPDF subshell here the way the clairvoyant did in psi perception of quarks, which was later proven to predict in advance subatomic particle physics. So if your kids could see the atomic table the way a clairvoyant does, that means psychokinetically they can imagine they can manipulate matter out of light if they can visualize it accurately. So your chemistry teacher has to use the right pictures. This is a life force in a building. The place of the echo is actually a place of capacitive implosion, which is what Castaneda called place of power, sacred space, charge implosion, and the only place a ghost can go, because that implosion is what releases the ghost. So strong evidence, this is from the slideshow about the cause of vision being charge implosion. The cause of vision, but the same implosion is what allows vision and what allows memory through death. It's also why the visions at the moment of death are electrically contagious, as Ray Moody so famously showed. And the sacred space of the Hopi burial ground, and the only place that really a pyramid or an Agnihotra or a labyrinth or even a Theraphi works well, is at the magnetic line cross points for this reason, because they're enabling compression. So that's why in sacred space like this forest, you can see the ghost leaving at the moment of death, because the plasma is able to propagate coherently. But if this was a hospital full of electrosmog, that plasma ghost is not going to be so coherent, because that's called hell. So this is the physics of death process in Egyptian, that the implosive capacitance of the natron in the mummy is the reason mummy powder was served in every pharmacy in Europe for 300 years. It had a gold powder component. But it's not because the Egyptians were eating gold powder. They might have, but actually it's because the alchemy of capacitive implosion of the capacitance of the natron converted the flesh into a gold powder Ormuz emulet. That's why there was gold powder in the mummy powder served in every pharmacy in Europe for 300 years. Its implosive capacitance is the physics of mummification, which is a hint to the shrink process of successful death, also taught by the Tibetans. They call it green line, red line. The body gets smaller. Well, where did it go? The capacitance imploded the charge through the speed of light at the Planck threshold, making a longitudinal array, and that's what the Tibetan inhabited and why he shrank. This is Korotkov, you've seen this before, measuring using cadavers how many hours after death it takes for the aura, your ghost, to leave your body after death, 10 and 36 hours, correlating to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and also measuring where the ghost goes after death and why, because the ghost needs the implosive power point in the room in order to implode and then propagate longitudinally, which is the only way ghosts can be released, which is also why Theraphi is famous for releasing ghosts. This is, as documented, the Heinrich Kluwe form constants. It's well known, this is what you're going to see at the moment of death if your death is coherent, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral. Actually, many LSD experiences report the same. but the reason you see this when you die is because your DNA has to do this implosion, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral. And this is what your DNA is doing at the moment of death, lattice, cobweb, tunnel, spiral, to braid implode, so that that centripetal force, successful death, is a black hole. That's the physics, because you can't get into that array without successful compression. And anger cannot compress well, so don't try dying with anger. It don't work. It's 1/7. No, you have to be a shareable wave. Think pure principle, or else no compression. And you can't enter a Stargate portal for the same reason. So if you understood how to measure life force, you can then understand how to prepare for death and Stargates. So this is from the slideshow originally where we were teaching the cause of vision is charge implosion, but it relates to our idea about the charge implosion, enabling lucid dreaming and therefore successful death and Stargates. So where the longitudinal wave is distributed down the wormhole, conventional physics says entanglement produces action at a distance through Einstein-Rosen wormholes. The problem with this language is it's too damn vague. Actually, more accurately, phase conjugation is the embedding nesting perfected they call entanglement in conventional physics, basically implosion. And that's what allows the vril, which is the longitudinal wave, to be squirted into the wormhole, which is the real physics of action at a distance. And the way that wormhole propagates the longitudinal wave down the compressional center of the tube, that's the reason the sun is a Stargate. So understanding those implosive longitudinal wormholes around not just the Earth grid dodeca, but around the galaxy is the introduction to the plasma physics of Stargates. This is called inhabiting the array, key to Stargates, lucid dreaming, and portals, like Jodie Foster in the movie Contact. Remember, Jean-Charles Moyen, Elena's friend, when he came back from his lucid dream, he had sand between his toes from where he went in the lucid dream, and there were witnesses. Think about that. What does that tell you? A very coherent lucid dream is embedding in that longitudinal array. And the more, it's like in the book 9 Faces of Christ, the first time you lucid dream, you can see your lover, but you can't smell her. But then you take more of your aura with you next time you lucid dream because you get more coherent. Eventually, you take all of your organs of perception with you. So the more coherent the lucid dream is, the more you've inhabited the array. We need to understand the nature of that array. And that's what the next part of this conversation is supposed to be about. So the more compression, the higher the density, the harmonic superposition, which is access to the next dimension, the more compression in the array, the more superluminal golden ratio harmonics of propagation. That's why if you can sit still and not go insane when Kundalini turns into a lightning bolt, visualize the movie Powder, you're entering the stillness. Well, yeah, If you don't die, you'll come back with lots of vision, but you might die. And that's what Kundalini is. That's what the movie Power was. You know, when Daniel Brinkley came back from three lightning bolt experiences with a death experience, everybody he touched, he could see every emotion of their life. His DNA became measurably superconductive. He inhabited the array, but you know, it's better if you take that slowly, actually. So this is exactly the reason optical fiber is more info dense than ADSL, because the rate and the efficiency with which the wave travels down the fiber, which is called the dielectric media, increases the info density, the modulation density, and the distance. Now, if you add to that in the longitudinal array, what is propagating is golden ratio multiples of the speed of light. Remember, Professor Raymond Chow, 1.62 times speed of light measured, proof, smoking gun. You know, if the primary measurement of faster than light velocities, Professor Raymond Chow, is golden ratio 1.62 times the speed of light, that's a smoking gun that we're right. Not only is that the cause of gravity, but that is a longitudinal array which inhabits. That's the collective unconscious. That's the DNA radio. That's how stargates work. So the more there's compression in that lightning bolt, that's what inhabiting the array is. So this is the last slide, actually. So when that array is compressed, it's like these billiard balls get closer and closer together. So when you drop one ball, a billion billiard balls down the array, one ball drops off at the other end faster than the speed of light, potentially golden ratio multiples times the speed of light. And those harmonics times the speed of light, eventually, as the density of that array gets greater and greater, the portal Stargate, which is the heart of the sun, leads to Andromeda. The reason it does is because of the density of that array of longitudinal propagation, which is not just the physics of gravity, but it is the physics of stargates. Stop the screen share. So why don't we do some conversation at this point? So we see how, if we really know what life force is, we can reveal all these other things about lucid dreaming, taking memory through death, and immortality. I hope that was a happily ever after.
Thank you so much, sir, as always, for that presentation. But did anybody want to jump in? We'll do the usual raising your hand virtually, so it's a little more organized and structured. I have a couple of questions myself, but I want all of you to jump in first. Riel, please.
Thank you. Okay, wow. Yeah, it's so interesting to feel like I'm sharing the wave the more I listen to your lectures, Dan, and how this, I think this might be, number 6 in the series with Gen Z.
Are we counting? Well, great.
Yeah, something like that. But I've got a bunch of questions as well, Dave, so we can go back and forth with it. But first off, I wanted to touch on, you mentioned that the Schumann resonance is off. Could you elaborate on that? Because that's, yeah. What did you mean by like the number 7.29, but then the number that you use is 7.83, which gives you the 53 hertz. So actually, can you explain what that?
Remember, life designers a billion years ago have returned. It's Thoth, Enki, and that's the 9. The meetings are in Ganymede right now, and they arranged that our atmosphere would cause life. This is the cedar cultures. And now if you happen to divide the circumference of the Earth by the speed of light, the natural resonance frequency, 7.83 hertz, the actual Schumann harmonic. Now, if you multiply golden ratio times Planck and keep doing that, you get to 7.29 hertz, a little bit less. So they were close, but. So see, when Lovelock proved that Gaia is negentropic, he didn't have a clue how. But now we know that the Schumann harmonic cascade makes Earth implosive, and that's the reason Gaia is self-organizing. Temperature, pressure, moisture, all self-organizing. The reason is that negentropy is caused by phase conjugate charge implosion tuned to Planck. Close, but not precise. And also, by the way, when they designed the moon and they put the frequency generators in the moon for the frequency, that's a whole other story. But the point is actually, if you are the life designers and designing a planet so that it will actually be fertile, you actually need to know some mathematics theory of charge implosion. And they were close, 7.83 actual, 7.29 theoretical. And if you multiply that times golden ratio, it's 53 versus 50. That's what we're explaining.
So who was close?
Well, in this case, if you believe the 9, it's not only the book, The Only Planet of Choice, and Enki and the Cedar races, they have returned. Ask Elena Danaan about the meetings on Ganymede. Oh yeah, they're back here. The Cedars, because they seeded tens of thousands of humanoid cultures around the galaxy. And ours is not particularly, special, but the genetic diversity here means there is a potential for. That's why they're so interested, because Harmonix includes, but that's a whole other story about the Cedar races. But anyway.
Okay, so then I wanted to connect that. Okay, so I'm still trying to understand that, but then that brings us to another thing with the 9, where in our chat there, Brandy mentioned. So I noticed that the number 63 and 117, the colors, the photosynthesis, blue and yellow, that might be its own like deep conversation, but I just noticed those two numbers, and then Brandy said, well, both of those numbers equal 9. So that's very fascinating with how does that tie into?
Because remember, 63 and 117 degrees is the inside and outside angle of the faces of a pentodeca. And when photon toroids phase themselves into the faces of a pentodeca and the tetracube, the 35, the 45, and 90 degrees, the name for those tilt angles is blue, yellow, red, green. So what we call color is photons that are accurately nested in a dodeca. The reason is because phase conjugate charge implosion is the reason color exists, because that's the reason photons are sorted into phase, and the phase are, remember, color is not two-dimensional. That's crap. Photons are 3D and they're donuts. And the angle that those donuts emerge from that we call a rainbow, we just figured out why.
Okay, thank you. Wow.
Would anybody else like to jump in with a question? I just put in the chat. If you would like me to read it, just type it there. Or if you want to ask yourself, just raise your hand virtually. If not, I'll ask a couple questions of my own.
I mean, yeah, Dave, I still got more questions, so it's your turn.
Sounds good. Just want to make sure that everyone else in here has an opportunity to ask if they like. So Dan, I've recently been exploring the concept with respects to biology, physics, you name it, as it pertains to certain physicists postulating that when an electrical charge goes from one node to another node, that the transition states between that transference from one node to the other is actually more prominent and significant than the node it is going to. And that made me think philosophically of, the joy is in the journey in life and that's sort of thing. Can you comment on that in any capacity?
You can have fabulous philosophical conversation asking, where was the electron cloud as it was moving between electron shells? Where was it? It was nowhere. Is that a quantum leap? Well, actually, the reason the electron can get between shells, but the electron has to land on the shell. It literally doesn't exist between shells, but yet the charge is somewhere. Remember, our name for mass is when charge is rotating enough to store some inertia, which is at the nodes. But where it's propagating as a wave between the nodes, there is no mass measurable, and therefore no charge density, no slip knot. So now, if you take that concept to the extreme, and much more advanced conversation is, here is Ingo Swann sitting there, repeatedly heating that thermistor, lighting a flame with his mind at a distance in a Faraday cage. Okay, now we now know exactly how he did that. His brain waves implode, propagates a longitudinal wave, which will go through about anything. And where was that wave when it was between his brain and into that flame he lit at a distance in a Faraday cage? How did that charge get in that Faraday? No known electromagnetic transverse wave can go through that Faraday cage. What made it through? The longitudinal wave. So that's the physics of action at a distance that Einstein called spooky because he didn't have a clue.
So when I've been recently listening to some debates, lectures, you name it, of philosophers who also have backgrounds in mathematics and computer science, and they seem to, I guess, again, postulate or propose that we may be living currently in a transition state, if you will. Would you agree with that relative to like what you just said about all of this, or?
Well, from a macro perspective, culture and consciousness is always leaping between quantum states. And in the spark gap between coherent states is a very tricky moment. That's where everything is possible, but everything could fall apart. When the wave is leaping between electron shells, in between, it's messy. But that's why that's the physics of alchemy. That's why that's the physics of fusion. Because if you can make that compression wave non-destructive, then the isotope transitions can be non-destructive. And that's the physics of alchemy. That's literally how you make gold out of mercury, quite literally. And it's real physics, it's real isotope transitions. And that's more than metaphor for what has to happen to your aura by charge implosion at the moment of death, or you do not take memory with you.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Rena asks, is there a difference in the photons emitted from the retina versus brain as far as frequency or color? And second question, do you believe that we are tied to Earth via its geomagnetic field?
Oh, well, the second question is so easy. The geomagnetic field, primary harmonics, are the Schumann harmonics. And the Schumann harmonics have everything to do with our negentropy. So when you live in the country in a cabin in the woods and you got lots of Schumann harmonics, your aura goes big, quick. And when you go into the metal city with electrosmog hell, your aura gets crushed quick. So we're very hooked. Let's see, I'll just hit pin this.
And also, to Rena's first question, is there a difference in the photons emitted from the retina versus the brain as far as frequency or color?
Yes, that's the more fun question. The other question was so easy. I did that one first. Let's take the example. We're in the biodynamic Steiner School class, and they're teaching the kids that they have to draw the picture of that rose so accurately that when they close their eyes and visualize that rose, they only graduate if the room fills with the smell of roses. So that means their inner visualization, the inner muscles that our children are losing because they watch too much damn TV, the inner muscle to steer the waves inside their head, I imagine, that's the skill our children are losing. Now, the physics of the reason the room fills with the smell of roses when the kids visualize a rose accurately enough, and I do mean the physics, is because the flowering brain emits a measurable infrared power spectrum, which is the physics of olfaction, as Callahan proved. That's why I saw personally many times the hummingbirds smashing in the window when Our Lady in Marshfield, Massachusetts, was meditating and having bliss. This is a sealed house, and the bliss in her brain was radiating so much infrared through the window in the ice cold winter that the hummingbird kept smashing into the window because wanted the nectar. How did that hummingbird smell that bliss? That was infrared. So now there is a photon emitted by a brain. Now, how is that different from the photons in your eyeball? Well, it's power spectrum, obviously. But the photons in the flowering brain obviously could be more broad spectral. So the closer you get to real bliss process, the more you have access to more broad spectral photon emission, which is kind of what the biophoton lab was measuring for years, that the human body emits photons. This is old news. The new information is that the bliss process emits photons, which achieve more charge distribution. And that's really the physics of bliss, which is why I think it's so cool to measure the infrared biophysics of bliss. And this is actually how insects and birds navigate. And actually the microwave emissions is why the microwave carvings on this pyramid wall is how insects navigate, because they were microwave coherent. You want to study ceremonial magic? You need to study microwave antenna design. But that's another.
Could this also substantiate potentially the concept of how recently, I forgot if he's a neurologist or what precisely, but Professor Michael Levin, allegedly he's on track to be a new Nobel Prize winner for the first time, pertaining to, he's explaining precisely, sir, what you've been saying for I don't know how many years, which is, again, the physics side of it is just the physical side, the hardware of the computer, if you will. Whereas, again, then there's the esoteric side, or what he calls the software of it. Now, he says he gets, made fun of when he calls it the software of it all, but he was essentially saying that he could see the electrons have its own memory, forming two eyes, a nose, and a face, regardless, theoretically, not in practice, practice, but regardless of where you were to place those electrons along the anatomy of the human body, basically potentially substantiating that, again, what's been going on allegedly in these deep underground military bases with extreme depraved experimentation, putting a face on a stomach or something like this. Does your work corroborate the electron memory angle of that? And the way, does this have anything to do with the seeders that are meeting on this other planet? I forgot what you meant, you called it, excuse me.
Ganymede. Well, I have a short story to tell. When the clairvoyants were looking at subatomic particles, they called the Anu, 3 Anu per quarks, perception of quarks. Famously, they later concluded that these little Anu, which you might call a particle of life force, related perhaps to this concept of microvita. And I knew the lady, it was Mireille Zupa in Buffalo, and Dora Kunz, famously president of Theosophics, I met with in Chicago. They were drawing pictures of clairvoyant visions of these subatomic particles, and they were very, very clear. These Anu, subatomic life elements, seen clairvoyant, slipped out of plasma, that in many circumstances, the Anu would be happy and impish and mischievous and full of life. And that would be, for example, in a tree, in a forest, or in a flower, for example. However, if you looked at the Anu in a block of aluminum, oh, hell no. Those Anu were in jail, man. They ain't happy. They cannot charge distribute. There was a huge difference. So understanding the context of charge distribution efficiency, called sacred space and life force, the Anu, the subatomic particles, are impish and happy and mischievous and self-aware and doing all kinds of cool conscious stuff individually, subatomically. Whereas you look at, inside a steel building or block of, where the charge has been put in jail.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So that is the difference. I think that's a metaphor that would be helpful.
So could one argue, or would this be totally incorrect in potentially arguing that the context of the, I guess you could say, of the, what did you refer to it as? Excuse me, of phase conjugation, if you will, I don't want to use the word ends, but stops after a certain barrier, at least relative to Earth's orbit, because of I guess you could say, creators modifying the, again, low Earth orbit and the planet itself, arguably?
Well, the story was the Galactic Federation's put these nuclear generators in the moon to amplify the amplitude of the Van Allen belt, which temporarily prevented the Stargates from working here. But that's another story. And it's true, they tried to trap the Draco and the Grey's Nebu here. And those nuclear generators basically broke down. And by the way, meantime, they got away. So for a while, there was a bit of a quarantine, that's real. But in more general terms, specifically to your question, I think what the advanced cultures call misqualified energy, for example, aluminum. Aluminum, if you look at the health record of employees in aluminum plants around the planet, it's some of the worst on the planet. If you look at the incredible environmental catastrophes of planet Earth, a huge number of them have to do with aluminum plants. Why? Because when they take that high voltage amperage and freeze that bauxite into that geometry that prevents charge distribution, you hold aluminum in your hand and your hand goes numb. That's called misqualified energy. It prevents consciousness because it prevents charge distribution. So the amount of mass that's been frozen in that aluminum is literally evil in the sense that it lives spelled backwards, because L to the I of phi, life, is turning into the focus of emitting, L to the I of phi, life. Whereas you see the backward spelling of evil is simply turning out of embeddability.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Truly. Thank you so much. Riel, if you want to jump in.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see which question do I want to do? Okay. So the fact that Wi-Fi kills life force.
Well, it kills germinating seeds by a new animation. It's just published. It's quite clear.
Kills germinating seeds. Okay. So to your knowledge, is there an alternative to that? Because basically that's like, without Wi-Fi, we can't even be doing what we're doing right now, right? We're communicating through Zoom.
Actually,
so like, yeah.
When they installed our fiber a couple of days ago, and they accidentally turned the Wi-Fi on for about 3 minutes. Myself and 2 other ladies in the house were screaming with nausea immediately, demanding that they instantly turn off the damn Wi-Fi. And we finally found the button, turned off the Wi-Fi, and the nausea went away instantly. And we plugged everything into Ethernet, and I'm talking to you now and doing great.
So Ethernet, that like was that how people communicated before they introduced 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G?
Well, and you know what's worse is actually Bluetooth. Is it messy? Because it's a square wave. Yeah, it really messes you up. So I mean, at least, you know, if you have to use it for a few minutes, well, okay. But in general, plug in an Ethernet cable and turn off the damn poison. For sure. And you're saying what was used before? Well, I think the Druids used DNA radio. They went to the nearest big oak tree and got the Schumann harmonics, and it worked great.
So in addition to the like biologic architecture, which is a movement that you're trying to push, which like I think the idea of like vote bliss when you're trying to the polis body. Yeah, exactly. So in addition to that, it's like we got to go to our city councils and say, hey, we need to eliminate 5G from our entire city networks. But unfortunately, 5G is, you know, a crucial component of smart cities, which we know is, you know, a clear direction that things are going. So, I mean, that's just interesting to try to resist that.
I mean, I think, you know, it's going to take a while before that we realize that's the return of the Borg, but at least I think it's well known in the literature now. Many schools have figured out a direct inverse relationship between Wi-Fi and attention span. I believe that's been published. You know, we're getting there. We realize that attention, it starts with when they put sunlight instead of fluorescent in the classroom, dramatic increase in attention span. The physics is because that increased centripetal force, the definition of attention. So sunlight produces attention, John Ott, book Health and Light. So the reason the sunlight produced attention and the fluorescent light didn't is because the frequency harmonics of implosion were present, and that is the definition of attention.
Would anybody else like to jump in? Whether, again, if you would like to write on the chat on the side here, or if you would like to raise your hand virtually.
I see Real has his hand still up.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to give others a chance. But yes, oh sorry, 1 second.
Are always fun.
Yes, Arena asks if and then we'll get right back to you, Real. If our consciousness is able to be stored or inhabit the geomagnetic field, what happens when we have magnetic reversal? That's a good question.
Well, a magnetic reversal is not as catastrophic as a real pole reversal. And magnetic reversals are actually natural. It's in the long run, it is the Earth breathing, and it's necessary. But during the process of magnetic reversal, there is a lot of psychological and even fertility effect for sure. But in the long run, that is a breathing process which is natural to the Earth. But in the short run, I mean, yes, it could be quite traumatic. And even bird navigation and plane navigation is radically affected.
Do we get erased by chance within that reversal?
A lot of variables there, but we certainly could. There's the layers of fragility of what's going on here are shocking and scary. Let's get real. That's why we need to learn to take memory through death pretty quick here.
If I'm being honest with you, sir, this is what, again, it's possible that I may be fed nonsense, but this is what some sources of my own within the United States government have been telling me as of late, that either in a worst case scenario, we're going to have a fractured planet or population, whatever that means. Best case, we figure out how to work through this.
I think, you know, of the major mass extinctions of the past few million years, magnetic reversals have not in themselves produced mass extinction, but other correlate events could, including storms, for example, and other things. So there's too many variables there to attribute. But I think magnetic reversal could be survived under the right circumstances, but that's a very complex thing to model for sure.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Natural.
Thank you so much, sir. Riel, did you want to jump in?
Sure, yeah. So very fascinating that you said that the sun is a Stargate and it leads to Andromeda.
Yeah.
So is in the Andromedans, are they an integral part of the treaty that Eisenhower signed and like the exopolitical side of things? Because you mentioned that things are happening on Ganymede outside Jupiter.
Yeah.
But so then a lot of these seeders, did they come from Andromeda? Like, do we have this intrinsic connection? Is there like a binary star with our sun and the other one is in the Andromeda star cluster?
You know, there's tremendous consensus now. Alex Collier agrees, Elena Danaan agrees, the SSP express. This story is very well agreed on now. There's consensus. The short summary, Andromedans were one of the founders of the local galactic federation along with the Arcturians, and now there's hundreds, if not thousands, of local civilizations as part of the Galactic Federation. And the Supergalactic Federation is what really is part of the Cedar races, the Nine, Enki, and Thoth, and they have returned on Ganymede, only planet of choice, the Nine. And I made a film about 2 weeks ago with Elena Danaan about the plasma physics of the Nine, 50,000 views, Elena Danaan's video channel. But now the treaty that Eisenhower signed was the opposite. The Andromedan Galactic Federation was trying to send Valiant Thor and others to lead Eisenhower in a useful direction. But Eisenhower got tricked and could not conceive of dumping his nukes, which was a prerequisite. And so he got sucked into the Nebu and the Greata Treaty, which resulted in thousands of abductions and so many Greys and Dracos parasitically inhabiting this planet that it took a major Galactic Federation intervention to zap all of those Greys and Dracos out of the deep underground military bases, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, most of the Dracos and the Greys, the Nebu, have been zapped out of the solar system now, thanks to the Federation, we believe. But it's like getting a tick out of your arm. You still got a whole bunch of crap left in there. And that's what's left in many branches of our government, et cetera. A lot of parasites.
Would you say some of that crap is representative of what's occurring in Ukraine at the moment?
You know, very complicated subject. Certainly 6 million people dying, very complicated subject. But our sources say that actually the wrong branch of the Pleiadians may have given Putin their guns just after they left, having shot out the majority of the Kingu underground, actually.
I'm getting goosebumps because I was told that by someone in Panama just 3 days ago. Wow.
Yeah. And because he had such intense relationships with them. But I still think that Putin's a thug. Honestly, I agree. But unfortunately,
like the shittier end of a stick, which one do you pick, right?
Well, I think it really needs to be revealed that the parts of our government that are working well with the Galactic Federation now can pull through this. And I think we need the revelation of our government's relationship to the Galactic Federation urgently. And I agree with Elena Danaan and Alex Collier and Michael Salla, exopolitics.org. We all agree on the story. No one disagrees now. The story is compelling.
Thank you so much. Of course, Riel, I'll pick you in a second. Just want to give everyone just another chance as well. I'm not sure, sir, how much more time you have on your end.
I'm feeling playful. Go ahead.
Sure. Okay, so Riel, please. And please, anyone else, I encourage you to jump in if you like.
Yeah, I don't mean to hog it all, but I mean, it's almost like first come, first serve with this, so I'm taking the opportunity.
Plus, you're smiling. You're smiling.
I'm very excited, yeah. You mentioned that 1/7 is not shareable. Can we say that the 5/7 is shareable? Because that's the inside-outside spin?
Actually, the article with documentation from the Centix literature about the musical wave shape, proven, documented musical geometry of the wave shapes of emotion from Centix, Manfred Klein, article at goldenmean.info/touch. And you can see that when you squeeze someone to say, I love you, the moment of maximum pressure in the duration of that squeezing process will always occur tantrically delayed until 0.618 into the duration of that squeeze. And that's the physics of love. And the tingle you feel if you squeeze someone correctly to say, I love you, is that implosion. It's teachable by measurement. However, and the max pressure occurs at 1/6 in the squeeze and the violin string touch that says joy. But the squeeze or the touch that says anger, max pressure occurs at 1/7 into the duration of that compression wave, which is max destructive interference, the definition of anger, useful for kicking the money changers out of a temple, but definitely you cannot take that wave geometry through implosive compression named death. because it doesn't compress well. Sorry, it doesn't make a shareable wave. It makes destructive interference. So it's not that anger can be useful sometimes. You want to break some stuff up? Well, use some anger, but don't identify with it because it ain't going to last long.
So you can hug somebody in a way that is actually like projecting anger, or because like I've been hugged by people where it didn't feel good. And I didn't know if it was me or if it was them. Like they had, it seemed like they had good intentions, but there was something where it just like, it irritated me.
Well, it's actually, Manfred Klein's beautifully, he was a concert violinist who, after he realized that it was fun to make people cry playing his violin, he measured the change in pressure over time of the touch that said, I love you, he meant a centimeter. It's a button on a spring. That's it. That's all it is. And you make a graph of the change in pressure over time. And he did it tens of thousands of times. Anger, love. By the way, fear has no wave shape at all. Stop the world. I want to get off. Fear is the mind killer because it's a spin killer. So, but anyway, the geometry of pressure that says, I love you, is a wave shape that reaches a delayed max pressure tantrically at 0.618. It's the most delayed. And so when you say, did you feel a tingle in your DNA? Then you know my love hug worked. It's that implosion. Whereas, so you can actually sit next to someone and squeeze their hand 3 times and do a question and answer. Which was that, love, anger, or joy? And you can practice. And if you have the right equipment, you can measure the geometry of the wave shape, which is the physics of emotion proven in music. But so emotion is the ratio into the long wave that determines whether the cascade implodes or interferes. Glandular emotion, defined by measurement. goldenmean.info/touch. I knew Manfred Klein very well. Now, he measured the wave shapes. I graphed the ratios. He didn't get the ratios. He didn't see the golden ratio in that. He drew the wave correctly, but he didn't even see the golden ratio there.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Dave, do you have a question?
Please, if you would like to.
That's actually, Sam says, yeah. That's how my wife first said I love it. It's a perfect squeeze, man. And if you graph the change in pressure over time in the perfect birth canal, the actual physics of rebirthing, that implosion is what brings memory through birth of past lives. That's why underwater birthing works so well for increased IQ, because the change in pressure over time when the fetus emerges from the birth canal becomes more gradual and less discontinuous. So the skull bones decompress more contiguously and you get higher higher IQ and balance.
Okay, so when we had our friend Vida on the call, you had mentioned that she was extending the work of Dr. Emoto, right. And she said that she was able to notice in water when you had like the pure water versus the tap water, and the pure water, I can't remember the term she used, affected the tap water just by being beside it. So can we apply that same concept to humans with aura fields, where you have somebody with a healthy aura simply sit next to somebody with a broken aura, and that will automatically or heal the other person?
Yeah, it reminds me of our really experienced therapists, plasma therapists. They say if someone comes into the room with a negative attitude, you really should very gently invite them to leave and come back another day, because the plasma won't like them. And it's like your pet kitten won't sit and run its motor to heal you unless it likes you. And the plasma of the Theraphi is like your pet kitten. It's got to like you or it ain't going to help you. And eventually, if you get a really biologic environment for Theraphi like nature, the plasma will stick around. You don't even have to turn the machine on, actually. It's a family pet, just like the DNA of the Hopi corn.
Riel, did you want to, was there anything else? I actually wanted to ask Dan a couple things, but it's not anything.
It's all you, Dave.
Okay, sure. Dan, I would like to share my screen with you very quickly because there's 2 photos I'd like to ask about. Actually 3 photos, if that's all right. So first off, we have here, I will pull it up right now for all of us. We have here an alleged map from back in the day that the Nazis seem to write up here,
Oh,
pertaining
yes.
on how to get to Agartha.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Now we have translation at the top. Descent. Don't disregard your your compass and all of that. Would you say this would, in your humble opinion, through all your years of research and communication with individuals related to this, would this be an accurate representation if one could get there now? Of course, there's the whole concept of, the big countries guarding it and all of that, but would this still be, in your opinion, a way to get into it, if you will, or have there been frequential and harmonic changes in the planet that may make this obsolete?
I think they called it New Schwabenland.
Yep.
And I think it's pretty well documented. There's lots of documentaries on that, and it's quite real. And I think it's true. Of course, deep underground there were sources of heat and water. It was a pretty friendly environment, actually. Our sources indicate that although the Nazis controlled that for many years, and in fact booted Admiral Byrd out of there using the Mercury Vortex flying saucers, but recently, first of all, I think the Tegatan Pleiadians claim they managed to kick most of the Kingu out from underground, which are a branch of the reptilian. But the New Schwaben, which is the Dark Fleet, which Johann Fritz talks about, they were only recently ejected by the Galactic Federation. That is our news. And so they were there for a long time, but recently, so the Earth Force now has resumed control, although that was controlled by the Nazis for decades. And in fact, they lost 17,000 men, which we're told, when they tried to even put a base on Mars because of the Dracos. But the Draco Gray and Nebu now supposedly have been ejected, both there underground and on the Moon and Mars, which were all infested.
So in your opinion, if I said, obviously you probably haven't been there yourself, but if I said, Dan, let's use this map from 70, 80 years ago to try and get there, and let's just assume hypothetically we had the means to get there, would you trust this instructions list here, or would you say it's too obsolete?
I don't know, but I know that there are, even in the last 10 years, there are films of ex-military pilots flying over the part of the South Pole that they were forbidden to go. And they actually showed film of these giant caverns. And obviously so they know there's something there that was drastically affecting their magnetics. So yeah, and any planet that cools from a very hot molten state is going to have huge hollow cavities. That's normal. And it was called the pink light. There's a famous series about the fact that underground there's a natural light, a smoky god, it's called. And in fact, we believe that there is a nickel to copper cold fusion process happening underground, which creates a dim background light in many areas inside the Earth.
Wow. Okay. Would that be the same? Would that, or parallel to what some have described as the inner sun, so to speak?
I think yes.
Okay, got you. So it would not be natural in your opinion?
Oh no, it would be that a slow cold fusion, probably nickel to copper, not unlike Rossi, it's called the smoky god. Inside the Earth, there's a natural light in some areas. Absolutely.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, I thought you were implying that someone had placed that there. Artificial. No. Okay.
Yeah. And in Journey to the Center of the Earth, there's a bioluminescent linings and in the hollow Earth. So.
But actually, there's very advanced bioluminescent linings also in many of the arcs that the Supergalactic Federation has planted and now are awakening. One in Ukraine and one on the Bermuda Triangle. Elena.
Some people even seem to miss, some people laugh when I say it, but the recent film, the big blockbuster film Godzilla versus King Kong, in the intro credits, Admiral Byrd with stock footage from back in the day is talking about Agartha, Inner Earth, and they flash it on the screen for a couple of seconds. And it's like, wow, it's, you want to talk about drop feeding. I mean, there's, yeah.
It was a tragic moment when the Eisenhower administration quashed Admiral Byrd's story. It was tragic. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's see here. I wanted to show you this picture here because I find this interesting. Since we're just, hanging out, looking at some stuff, what would you say this would be? I know it's just an image and all of that, but some have speculated that there's these plasma spheres, if you will, that other beings actually use as sort of like a surveillance camera to view our world or our dimension. And if you look close enough, you could see a little figure, two eyes, what seem to be the nose, the here we go, legs right there. Would this be something that your work could substantiate as a possibility realistically? I've spoken to individuals who from MUFON conferences, you name it, that say, Dave, I took my wife took a picture of me with an old Polaroid camera, and right next to me you could see exactly this.
The physics of the orbs, as they're called, living plasma, we know, for example, if you take a slow shutter speed analog camera, or I guess it's a fast shutter speed analog camera, and you're in for example, a basement that has fresh cut wood and you don't have a lot of metal around, you'll see a huge number of orbs. Or also, for example, at a bliss conference with a lot of teenagers that are having a lot of bliss, you see a huge number. And if you zoom in on those orbs, I have a website about it, you actually see dodecaecosa in the geometry of the orbs. Now, when you see in there little intelligent being, that is related to what they call the somatid, or the microzyme, which is a living plasma field. And in fact, one of the reasons that our culture cannot understand immortality until we understand how intelligence propagates as a plasma bubble. We must. And this is an example, absolutely. But remember, there's
is this why plasma and things like ball lightning are so? I'm recently, last couple of years, there have been some developments relative to the surface level of academia, but it's almost as if I've been told off the record that you can almost, it's very difficult to publish any type of advanced, whether theoretical or proven, postulation within academic papers pertaining to plasma. Would that be accurate?
Yeah. Well, indirectly, plasma toroids, called ball lightning, as we've taught many times, is famous because it responds well to telepathy. The reason ball lightning responds so well to telepathy, we have a friend, George Edgley, he's quite famous for this in Hungary. And the reason ball lightning responds so replicably to telepathy is because it's phase conjugate implosive plasma. At its core is the longitudinal connectivity, which is DNA radio. So ball lightning is the beginning of understanding what goes through death, actually, plasma toroids. And plasma beings and interstellar plasma beings, from Ophanum to the 9, understanding that physics we've been teaching for years. So understanding how intelligence propagates as plasma is very critical for the human condition. On the other hand, the plasma that surrounds artificial phase conjugate material like black goo and graphene are used by some of the most insidious, nasty interstellar artificial intelligence, AI, parasitic around. So there's an upside and a downside to that story. But the reason why parasitic, interstellar, galactic, nasty AI uses black goo AI is because of the super dielectric at its core, which is a communication device, which is used by the good guys and the bad guys. Think what came out of the Kava stone.
Okay, now if anyone else would like to jump in, please feel free. I just have one more question for Dan here, because since we have you here, I wanted to give you a bit of a very, very quick story about this gentleman. This is an illustration of what a gentleman by the name of, I believe, Tom Matei, he'll be coming on the show in the next month or two. He's been on Coast to Coast AM, some other places. He claims he has an ability that everyone else has as well. We could call it remote viewing. He calls it upsight. Now, I'm not sure exactly why he calls it that, but he had a very nice artist sketch out and draw for him precisely what he saw during one experience. And I wanted to ask you specifically about this, because he claimed to have been remote viewing a handful of grays in low Earth orbit on a craft and these grays were remote viewing what seemed to be, again, humans in a town or some part of Earth, right? And he said, right before, and the reason why in this sketch you see here there's a total of 4 or 5 grays that are not remote viewing, it's because they noticed him shortly afterwards, and he could hear them as thought forms sort of say, like, what the heck is this? How is this individual even remote viewing us? But point being is that he said whenever, for example, this individual here, that they're all remote viewing, would walk farther along the glass table scale to what's actually happening on Earth, and say this gray could not remote view that far to the table, another gray would step in and take this one's place, sort of like how computer software aids itself when one program fails and then another program is enabled to come in and help it. Is there anything behind your work that you could speculate on pertaining to this and this gentleman's experience?
Very appropriate question. By the way, our extraterrestrial sources, including Elena Danaan and Michael Salla, say that most of the more parasitic grays have been ejected. The Navy.
Okay.
But they are a very insidious interstellar galactic culture, the grays, and they respond to a hive mind, which is interstellar, and they can be very insidious. So we think this phenomena has been, for now, pretty much eliminated around the Earth. But to meditate on your question, I suggest you consider this. I think it was McMoneagle, I'm not sure, one of the more advanced famous remote viewers, indicated they believed there were alarms which could sense remote viewers at Area 51, for example. Now, as an electrical engineer, now that I know what is remote viewing is a coherent plasma domain that you propagate out into the array, aligning by coordinate, literally, to the destination where there's a focal point in the array. And guess what's at the focal point of where you're remote viewing, in this case, Area 51, is a bit of plasma coherence, which is measurable if you could measure the longitudinal component. So there's nothing wrong with saying there could be an alarm that could sense a remote viewer, but it would be a very advanced culture, actually.
Okay, because it's interesting you say that as well, because I've also been told off the record that again, unsubstantiated, but that there are in fact teams of remote viewers that all world governments use to deter from certain deter certain, not just humans, but esoteric beings from entering certain facilities and all that. Interestingly enough, I found that just like with other, I guess this speaks to maybe fractality and fractal cosmology, but the more, whether you're astral projecting, meditating in a group, the more you seem to do it in numbers, the more accurate one's desired goal or outcome becomes, whether it's remote viewing with grays, with humans, whether it's meditating in a group or in a circle. Would that be accurate, sir?
Maybe you take down that picture now.
Sure.
Yeah, just so we see faces here because it's a little friendlier. But you're right. There's a story to this, Maury, which is, look, this whole conversation has been about getting your aura compressed, imploded, and centripetal enough to allow you to do that kind of plasma projection. Whether you call it shamanic, remote viewing, astral travel, remote viewing, it is coherent plasma longitudinal interferometry, vector-based, and it creates a centripetal node at the destination point if you're focused. And that skill is what every single extraterrestrial race who's been doing abductions was looking for in humans, the skill to propagate in the lucid dream, in that array. And so obviously, group inertia could do that better. And in fact, if you find your soul group and you learn how to lucid dream collectively, that could save the planet, definitely. First step.
Could one argue that this soul group, as you call it, I would imagine individuals that you click with or vibe with better than others, could one argue these are relationships from previous soul cycles or lifetimes?
I mean, ideally, yes, or they could be people that simply have a common goal. But basically, to form your soul group, you cry together and you laugh together and you do yoga together, you meditate, and eventually, if you're lucky, you can lucid dream as a group. And that is powerful. Taking Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home in the sun, that could save the gene pool. We need that.
Wow. Okay. Rena asks, why wouldn't they just use Microsoft? Because Ingo couldn't see if that was used. I'm not. Sorry, Rena, if you could give some more context, I'm not sure.
Yeah, sorry. In Dr. Persinger's lectures, he commented that the remote viewing was blocked if where they were trying to look at if they used I think it was a Windows or Microsoft-based program, whichever one was Bill Gates.
Well, I think it would be true that software that was the opposite to coherence could inhibit lucid dreaming, as in fact, I believe that severe electrosmog, like 5G and Wi-Fi and all, severe electrosmog would inhibit lucid dreaming and remote viewing, absolutely. because basically, sometimes you walk on water and sometimes you take a bridge, but in general, the ability to propagate that longitudinal node out into the array, which is what Ingo Swann did and what we do when we lucid dream, depends on the coherence of that array. So if you're in the middle of a sacred oak forest with stone circles all around, man, you can lucid dream, you can have bliss. It's much easier. But if you're in the middle of electrosmog's hell, well, it's going to take a lot more energy because that's the nature of the array. And, an example of electrosmog hell would be Microsoft. In fact, there's a famous joke about Bill Gates. The end of the joke, well, that was hell version 1.096667, not remember the old Bill Gates joke? And it's about the version number you got when you ordered hell.
Right. Riel, please. And then unfortunately, sir, probably in 5-10 minutes, I myself have actually another.
Yeah, we need to close, but one or two last questions. Yeah, please.
Sure. Where is it that ghosts get stuck? You said that, you in order to take memory through death. So what is it where is it when a ghost gets stuck?
And are they, sorry if I may ask, are they magnetized, if you will, to a particular vicinity, which is why in many cases they can't leave homes or properties?
Yeah, many levels to that question. Very useful question though, but many levels. The psychological level is if there was a trauma which they could not forgive or understand, and it left an intense emotional shadow, that will be the location of the stuck. Actually, another aspect of that is in the place where the plasma could survive, a wooden cabinet, someplace where there were stones, etc., the ghost can hang out there for a while. But inside an aluminum box, never. A ghost will not be stuck in a square metal anything, ever, because the plasma cannot survive there. Now, what releases the ghost is getting enough implosive centripetal force to reach critical inertial escape velocity. Clearly, that's why when Professor Ray Moody documents the death visions are so contagious, is because you get this beautiful black hole going when there's a blissful death, and the plasma gets imploded and propagates into the array named heaven, and there's critical inertial escape velocity. It's beautiful. However, if the ghost had a lot of anger or confusion or died in a metal airplane crash and got confused, there wasn't enough coherence in the aura, then it can be stuck in the neighborhood. And for that, things like Therify or any shaman with enough bliss and critical mass in their aura can deliver a ghost. Korotkov made measurements. The ghost goes to the place of charge compression in the room. Castaneda called the place of power. The physics of that is implosive capacitance is critical to deliver the ghost into distribution.
Would you say, sir, that your work is something that has been, I guess you could say, already discovered on a quote unquote classified basis? It's just simply they won't admit to it. Hence why, again, when I try and ask people about your work within government, like about plasma phase conjugation, they go silent.
Well, I'm a secret that's hidden in plain sight. I've decided to be a shareable wave because nothing else is fun. And,
Right.
We have nano projects. We have a lot of projects that are other stages here. But I think our hope as a race is to become a shareable wave. And that's why I see the mission as education. And that's why I'm here.
Got you. Thank you. One more question from Rena, then we'll wrap it up. She says, but speaking on what you just answered with regards to Riel and myself, which we're very grateful for, Rena says, but we have such an artificial field surrounding us via technology. We could all be stuck because a shadow is created at baseline from this. Would this be accurate?
I do think that because so much of our electrosmog hell is tech related, that more and more people are getting fractionated at death, actually. And so I think it is urgent that we begin to teach our children. Basically, the ancients knew if you couldn't teach your teenager how to have bliss, you did not have culture. They were right. And so if we can't teach our kids how to have a bliss experience, we're in trouble. Right. Absolutely. And so what we need to realize that high tech is not evil. No, we simply need how to learn to communicate efficiently the way DNA does.
I just want to bring this up for even your audience when you put this on your side, sir. We interviewed a fine gentleman yesterday who has been investigating a lot of, I guess you could say, depraved individuals at the top and trying to expose them. And he is not necessarily, he is a believer, if you will, but he doesn't delve as deep as we do. But he actually mentioned, and I want to thank Riel for this, reminding me that the upper class of the financial elite teach their kids how to have super orgasms, whereas middle to lower class doesn't seem to be a thing, whereas the upper class, according to him, based on his research, seems to quietly teach their children that and reinforce it constantly from a young age.
You know, the orgasm process, which also can be at the root of Kundalini, can be a beautiful initiation to charge distribution. It's a beautiful thing. And when it's done as a tantric couple, I mean, it's starbending, beautiful power. And yet at the same time, it can become incredibly perverse, and it can, completely bleed the aura when it becomes parasitic. So it's very tricky. But if you can take that plasma and center it and make coherence, you literally inhabit stars with advanced orgasms. It's a beautiful.
And when you said that it can go either way, depraved or beautifully, that I guess that speaks larger to hermetic principles and polarity, just whichever path you decide to choose, so to speak.
Well, it's plasma that wants to get immortal. And, if it takes the right turn, it's truly blissful, shareable, and sustainable. But if it takes the wrong turn, it gets fixated on pain and, hurting other people, all because the plasma took a wrong turn on the right road to bliss.
Got you. Wow. Well, sir, I'd like to thank you so very kindly. Could you please let our audience know where and how they can find you? I know you always bring it up, but it never hurts to bring it up one last time for those that are not here at the moment.
Oh, yeah. By the way, on that conversation, the link would be goldenmean.info/Kundalini about the sustainable plasma projection and orgasm. But in general, fractalfield.com is and info@fractalfield.com, therify.net for our plasma tech, flameinmind.com. People know me, and I'm a shareable wave. YouTube.com/Dan Winter Fractal Field. And
great.
Again,
and since we're here, I'd like to not to put Veda on the spot, but would you like Veda to promote your website and your work as well?
Oh, sure. I have to turn myself off mute. Sure. My website is vedaustin.com, and I share daily on Instagram and Facebook, VedaAustin_water and Veda Austin water researcher. So you can't go wrong. You'll find me if you put my name Veda Austin in. So thank you for that.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
It was wonderful. The magic of water. And thank you, Dave and Riel, for bringing your smiles. We had fun.
Thank you, sir.
We're all becoming shareable wave.
There we go. All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much again.
Blessings. Sorry.